Good morning. Great to be with you. As always, Michael is off today. We have a packed show ahead as Governor Rick Scott prepares to announce his bid for the U.S. Senate tomorrow, we think. We begin with the race to replace him. The Republican primary frontrunner is Adam Putnam. He is currently Florida's Secretary of Agriculture. Before that, he served in the state legislature and in Congress. Putnam is gearing up for a tough primary against Congressman Ron DeSantis and likely Florida House Speaker Richard Corcoran. DeSantis already has the support of President Trump. Corcoran expected to formally enter the race as well. Adam Putnam came to This Week in South Florida when he was in town earlier this week. And we are glad to welcome Agriculture Commissioner and candidate for governor Adam Putnam. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you.
We are so glad you are. So tell us the basic question. Why are you the best Republican candidate to be the nominee, and why would you be the best governor?
Well, I believe that Florida deserves and needs the candidate for governor who knows Florida best and will always put Florida first. I'm a fifth-generation Floridian, small business owner and farmer in Central Florida, who also has experience running statewide as Commissioner of Agriculture. I know all of Florida, not just the parts that has its own interstate exits. And I am the only one talking about the importance of putting vocational and technical training back into our middle schools and high schools and supporting our state colleges instead of treating them like redheaded stepchildren like they have been lately.
Well, as long as you brought up, let's start with education. That is an interesting policy perspective. Very recently, the governor signed off on this year's budget. The education budget is something that, at least here in the urban school districts, both superintendents in Miami-Dade and Broward are up in arms over an incremental increase in spending. I think less than 47 cents per student.
Additionally per student.
And more than that,
I'd be upset too.
The criticism has been that most of the funding is not flexible to them anymore, but allocated and mandated. Would you have signed off on that budget? Give us your take on that.
You know, I'm a product of Florida's public schools. My 4 children are in Florida's public schools. I have 2 in high school and 2 in middle school. So supporting public education is very important to me, and we can do better. Consider this, and this is why it's important that you know all of Florida. Here in South Florida, we think about our urban school districts' needs and overcrowding and the fact that our basketball courts are covered with portables and people start eating lunch at 9:30 in the morning. In Hamilton County,
is that true? That's not
there
true.
are 2 schools in the entire county. 2 schools. So the next governor has to lead an education system that's the right education system for Miami-Dade and Broward, where you have high schools as big as 5,000 and multiple languages spoken and the challenges of overcrowding, and rural districts in Florida's Panhandle and Florida's Heartland, where you might have only 2 or 3 schools, and the head of transportation is also the head of food service, is also the head of athletics. We have to adequately fund public education, and that includes especially not having this one-size-fits-all program where every child has to go to a university or be a loser in life, which is what we're telling them now, and I think is flat wrong. We have to put technical and trade and career skills back into the system so that our students graduate from high school with marketable skills.
A quick question about something you just said. The funding for schools right now, Miami-Dade and Broward, are kind of donor communities for the, all of the things you just mentioned for urban school districts. The funding for urban school districts, and including Jacksonville and Tampa and all the big urban centers, is not commensurate with the cost of living and the issues that you just outlined. Much like your children go to school in a rural public school.
Which oddly enough, if you divided Polk County north to south, the west side would qualify for additional funding as an urban county, and the east side as a rural county. So
there has to be,
you have to put more money into the formula. I mean, that's the bottom line. The rural school districts don't feel like that they came out a winner either, with a 47-cent per child increase, and much of that tied up in categorical funds that don't give them the flexibility to do what they need to do.
Adam, let's get down to the bottom line. House Bill 7055, the education bill, this huge omnibus, there it is, bill, included $140 million for charter schools, schools of hope. House Speaker Richard Corcoran was the main sponsor, and then another, $40 million for Hope scholarships. Now, do you believe that, in fact, charter schools should have gotten that much money?
Well, school choice, charter schools, having options for our kids is important. As I said, my kids are in traditional public schools, but I think they meet the needs of many families, particularly Gardner scholarships and McKay scholarships for students who have special needs. But the vast majority of our students are in a traditional public school, and we need to make sure the resources are following those students so that those teachers and those students have the tools that they need to be successful, compete in this global economy, and win.
Let's talk about a little bit about that vocational idea that you had. Are you talking about shop, or are you talking about STEM classes? And because the vocations of the future are going to be all STEM, technology related, and I know that there are charter schools, there are public magnets who have those programs. Talk a little bit about what you see in that direction.
This is not your father's shop class. This isn't even the shop class that you and I had. You know, the CO2 cars that you put out on the playground to race.
For the record, I never had that class.
So this is a 21st century version of technical training, and there are STEM and non-STEM. So the #1 job vacancy in Florida is nursing. We can graduate high school students with a CNA so that they go get a job and a paycheck instead of student loan debt.
And how do you fund that?
It's coding, it's cybersecurity,
right.
But it's also the construction trades. It's also engineering. It's also plumbing and HVAC. I mean, no guidance counselors telling our students right now that the service tech at the Audi dealership is making more money than the algebra teacher.
That's good
and
to
that the lineman who restored our power after Irma had a very good holiday.
One more question along those lines. How do you fund that, and does that take funding away from arts programs, which are already pretty underfunded?
Look, this isn't pitting arts against vocational. We have a system now that says 100% of our students have to be on a university track, and if they fall off that track, they're going to be a failure in life, and I think that's wrong. I think you have to have the same options for that university student, AP, dual enrollment, all these things that are out there for that university-bound student, which is only about 1/3 of the student body. Those types of options need to exist for the other 2/3 to be able to apprentice and intern.
Last month, the legislature passed, the governor signed a bill that requires a 3-day waiting period to buy a gun. You got to be 21 now to buy any gun in Florida. There is an appeal filed by the NRA. You've seen you quoted as saying that if you had been the governor, you would have vetoed that bill. Would you?
So I would have worked with the legislature to get a bill that I could sign. I think the governor and the legislature deserve a lot of credit for moving swiftly and thoughtfully in a way that dealt with mental health issues, dealt with hardening our schools and school security, as well as the provisions that included the waiting period and the raising the age limit. I disagree with that, in that Broward County had a 5-day waiting period, and the Parkland shooter waited 5 days. And the idea that you can fight and die...
He was 18 years old when he had several guns, but when he bought the AR-15, he was just 18 years old.
Correct. So the waiting period had no effect because he waited 5 days for that, and he purchased it a year before the incident.
Right.
And I think it's important that you separate out those who are mentally unfit to own a firearm from those who are law-abiding citizens. That kid shouldn't have it at 18, at 21, or at 41. He was a hot, wet mess. He had police visit his house between 2 and 3 dozen times. Right. The FBI had been called. He'd been expelled for weapons violations, and DCF had been involved. We have to fix the mental health system so that people who are unstable don't get firearms at any age.
Secretary Putnam, you had a provision that you had postponed, a provision that you tried to put in one of the bills before Parkland that would have loosened, and I'm not quite sure that's the right word to use, but loosened the rules on background checks for concealed carry weapons. How does that jive with wanting to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them? Wouldn't it be better to do what most Americans by polling favor, is more universal background checks and stiffer background checks?
So it's important to understand what we were trying to do, and we withdrew that because of the discussions that were going on about other measures as it relates to firearms. we were attempting to make the standard for obtaining a concealed weapons license the same as what it is to purchase a firearm in Florida. So our standard would have been the same as the Florida Department of Law Enforcement applies today, which is that when you have someone who's attempting to purchase a firearm, or in this case attempting to get a concealed weapons license, and they have something from a different state many, many years ago for which there is no proof one way or the other to disqualify them from being able to exercise their right, how do you move forward? Do you err on the side of they're never allowed, or do you err on the side of they are allowed? And I believe that in the absence of action by the legislature, this will be decided by the courts. But it was very simply to hold the same standard that FDLE applies to purchasing a firearm to individuals who want to obtain a concealed weapons license.
Secretary, you are a member of the cabinet. Last week, Judge Mark Walker decided that Florida's method and process for restoring rights to former felons is unconstitutional. Weigh in on that for us. You have until April 29th, I believe it is, to come up with a new process. It's going to be on the ballot in November for voters to decide. We spoke a lot about this on this program last weekend, and the process that is rooted in Florida's old Jim Crow laws is going to be changed. You have been part of that process as a member of the cabinet. Weigh in on that for us.
So first of all, what he ruled was unconstitutional was the Florida Constitution, which has been in place since 1968. So this is not an Adam Putnam thing. The cabinet.
Nor did that question mean to make this an Adam Putnam thing.
But the judge kind of implied that we're the first people who have sat as the clemency board. This has been going on as long as Florida has had a modern constitution. So it's one thing to say it needs to be changed, it needs to be improved. It's another thing to say that the way that we've been doing it since 1968 is racist, and implying that we're the first ones who've been imposing this unusual standard.
If I can jump in, he didn't say, I believe, I read the opinion, that it's racist. Always dangerous when non-lawyers read judicial opinions, but he didn't say it was racist. He said it was arbitrary and capricious, and essentially he said Governor Scott has inordinate power, and it is he principally who decides who gets clemency
under the Constitution, not because Rick Scott seized it for himself.
What do you think was the question?
So here's the thing. So he said the Florida Constitution is unconstitutional under the U.S. Constitution, and he gave us a month to fix it. We're going to do our best to comply with the judge's order and try to fix something that's been in the Florida Constitution since 1968 in less time than what the judge took to write his opinion. So we'll go to work on that. However, I have always maintained that it is important that you have a different path for rights restoration for a violent offender than you do for a nonviolent offender. The other thing I think is important to keep in mind is that frequently you plead things down. If you have sexual assault on a child, you might charge down so that you don't have to put a kid on the witness stand. We would be aware of that. If you go to automatic rights restoration, it's a different situation. So we need to be smart about this. We need to be fair about this. And fairness includes not only fairness to the offender, the person who committed a very serious violent crime against a fellow member of society, but also fair to the victims.
Adam Putnam, great to have you here, and we hope you'll come back as the campaign season progresses.